2101. So Lemoria, just on 2101, which is the duplication ballot question, where we had the one witness yesterday, Ryan Bishop. Lemoria, just tell the committee.
So on the floor system, the committee testimony will include both HB 2100 and HB 2101.
Yeah, so it could be a little confusing if you're looking.
The title is for 2101, but the testimony is for both bills.
Okay, any questions about that? Okay, with that said, we're going to start with 2101. And Stacy, oh, I'm sorry, April, you're going to refresh everybody's memory about the testimony we got yesterday. There was no opposition, it was just Ryan Bishop testifying, but why don't you refresh everybody's memory?
Right, so House Bill 2101, Arbitration Reform for State Employees Act of 2026, withdrawal and repeal of duplicate proposed constitutional amendment. This is an emergency bill that prevents duplicative language from appearing on the November 2026 general election ballot. Specifically, the bill withdraws and repeals sections 2 through 4 of Chapter 156 of 2026. Essentially, what this is doing is there were two cross-filed bills that passed in this last session that included identical ballot language regarding the arbitration for collective bargaining for state employees. We have been since advised that since both of those bills passed, it's not like a usual cross-filed bill situation where the language just goes into the code once. This would actually result in this ballot question appearing twice on the next ballot, which could be confusing to voters. You could have an instance where voters are like, why is this twice? And they just vote on one, so maybe one would pass and the other would fail, which would create all sorts of legal problems. So the idea of this bill is not to change anything regarding the policy of what passed in those bills, but simply to repeal the ballot, or to repeal the ballot language in one of those bills so that the ballot language will only appear once in the upcoming election.
Okay, does everybody understand what's in front of us? Yes, Senator Gallion.
Curious with a question. So if we wouldn't have been here for a special session and this wouldn't have been dealt with, what would have happened? I mean, if you would have had two different, so to go on the ballot twice, say one was accepted, one rejected, and would they have had a special session just to potentially to try to correct that issue?
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't think so. I think the thinking was that because the legislature was meeting in special session, that this would be the cleanest way to deal with this issue. And I don't know how they were planning on dealing with it in the absence of the special session.
Senator Rosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just trying to understand on HB 2101, we don't actually have the ballot question language, but on HB 2100, we do have the ballot question language. I just want to make sure I'm understanding the process for. I understand your presentation that this is a duplicate, but I was trying to understand the ballot question and related to HB 2101, and also understanding that HB 2100 includes the ballot language and what the process was for each one of those.
Right. So this bill, because it's a technical sort of cleanup bill, what it's actually doing is it's amending a chapter law that passed in the last session. So the ballot language dealing with the collective arbitration and collective bargaining for state employees actually appears in chapters 155 and 156 of 2026. So if you want to pull up on your computers chapter 155 and or 156, you can see the actual ballot language. But again, this doesn't change anything about that language. It's just going to make it so that that language does not appear twice.
So you're saying to actually, I understand you're saying the ballot language was already approved.
Correct, in this past
And to
legislative
actually
session.
see the language that's on the ballot, to look it up, I was trying to understand if the new law that we passed about clarifying simple language for a ballot question, does that apply to this?
Yes, and that's, again, this is a constitutional amendment bill that already passed, and this doesn't change anything about the ballot question or the language of that ballot question.
But we're still voting on, we're voting to remove the duplicate. I understand why it's not included here, and I am assuming it went through, the reason it's not included is because it went through the normal Secretary of State process for,
Presumably, and Stacy is nodding her head, she knows a lot more about
I'm just,
the
I'm really
ballot.
just trying to understand, because it's a different process for HB.
Those chapters were passed in the normal course of session, so they comply with all the statutory requirements in the election law article for questions on the ballot. So if the Secretary of State was required to look at that language and draft it, and it must review it for plain language requirements, for meeting statutory deadlines, then all of those things have been done. You could probably go and take a look at the language already because all of those deadlines have passed. So what this does is just say, instead of it appearing twice on the ballot, it'll just appear once on the ballot. That's it. That's all it does.
Okay, Vice Chair wants to weigh in here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Croza, thank you for your question and for remembering that we did pass Senate Bill 29 after too many years of trying. If you go to elections.maryland.gov/elections/2026/ballot_questions.html. I know that's a ton, but in any case, that's where the State Board of Elections has all of our ballot measures and the proposed questions, because what the legislation set up was a process for the public or us to review the proposed language and make any suggestions. So question number 1 and question number 2, you'll see on that page, are identical. They're both on here. As Stacy and April said, it's not about modifying, and it is too late if the language were to be modified. I actually wrote letters on 2 of the ballot measures because I didn't think the language was right, but I thought this one was fine and was precise and simple.
Additional
Hope that's helpful.
questions?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion favorable from Senator Harris, second from the Vice Chair. Any further discussion? Moria, take the roll call on this one. House Bill 2101.
All right. Senator Kagan?
Aye.
Senator Kagan, yes. Senator Gallion?
Abstain.
Senator Gallion abstains. Senator Watson? Yes. Senator Watson, yes. Senator Harris? Senator Harris, yes. Senator Brooks?
Yes.
Senator Brooks, yes. Senator Carozza?
Abstain.
Senator Carozza abstains. Senator Washington? Yes. Senator Washington, yes. Senator Simonaire? Yeah. Senator Simonaire, yes. Senator Feldman?
Yes, that bill passes. 7 votes in the affirmative. Okay, let's go to House Bill 2100. Stacy, why don't you just give a big overview? We had a 5-hour bill hearing yesterday, so I don't know if you need to spend 5 hours, but just, or does anybody need an explanation? We did have the 5-hour hearing. You want to waive the explanation from Stacy and then just open it up for some discussion? You want to hear? Okay, Stacy, give us a big picture here.
House Bill 2100, Election Districts, General Assembly, and Representatives in Congress. This proposed constitutional amendment, if approved by the voters at the next general election, establishes that specified provisions of the Maryland Constitution regarding legislative districts apply explicitly to the election of members of the Senate and House of Delegates. 2, nothing in the Maryland Constitution, including the Declaration of Rights, provides applicable criteria for the boundaries of a congressional districting plan. And 3, the General Assembly must have the power to grant original jurisdiction to the Supreme Court of Maryland to review the congressional districting plan of the state. The bill also specifies that the language for the ballot question to be submitted to the voters at the November 2026 general election, notwithstanding any other law. There are no amendments.
Okay, so there are no amendments. The bill is as here. We're going to start with Senator Gallion for discussion, questions, et cetera.
Yes, because this is a House bill coming over, there's no amendments, but there was amendment we saw very late before, right at the beginning of the hearing is the first time I really got a chance to look at it. So I would just like to ask a little bit about that. So the amendment that was sent to us said on page 3, strike beginning with at, line 7 down through following in line 8 and substitute notwithstanding any other provision of law at the general election, the following question. So the notwithstanding, so that just pretty much separates this completely from what a normal, like the bill you just passed a few minutes ago, has to take into account all the applicable laws, but this one doesn't? Is that what that means?
Generally speaking, yes. So the assumption is that the Maryland General Assembly is aware of all of the laws that it's passed. And in this case, having the special session in the beginning of August means that the timing that's set forth in the statute for how questions are produced on the ballot would be a conflict. But because you're passing a constitutional amendment, and the Constitution says that an amendment to the Constitution must go on the ballot at the next general election, this language clears up the problem of the timing in the statute. So essentially, it's just saying it's waiving those requirements for the July 1st deadline, the August 1st deadline, and the plain language requirements for the Secretary of State having to take a review and publish and put for comments. So that's what that language would accomplish.
Have we ever like waived those dates for anything else? You know,
It's actually quite common. If you look through the code, it often says notwithstanding any other provision of law, when the goal of the General Assembly is to waive certain requirements that already exist in order to pass another part that might conflict with another provision, or one that you don't know off the top of your head or can't find, where it might have a potential conflict. So it's actually quite common language.
So originally, this would have had to been put out in July to meet what the law is for everything else if we...
It would have had to pass before July 1st, yes.
Okay, Senator Simoner.
Okay, just following up on that. So the General Assembly could have called a special session before that, so it didn't have to waive these requirements, one. But by putting that House amendment, does it just limit the timing aspect, or that applies to all laws? Would the champion of plain language, would that be excluded from this bill as well?
Correct.
Is there a way we can amend it to get the plain language in there?
Well, at this point, the way that this bill is drafted, this language will go on the ballot. So the Maryland General Assembly is making a policy decision to waive those other requirements and put its language on the ballot instead of having to worry about those other requirements.
No, I understand that. My question was, we as a body determined and supported the issues that the vice chair has championed for years, that the public understands what they're voting on, basically. It's clear. So I'm asking, can we amend the amended version to say, we understand the timing issue? That's a technical thing. Can we amend it so we can include the clear, plain language that all other constitutional amendments have to adhere to?
Procedurally, yes.
Okay. Because, Mr. Chair, we have usually 90 days. We've had it basically 24 hours from the time we got the amendment to fully understand it, because I didn't fully understand what the amendment was when I was in committee. I was asking questions about being substantially the same, but then we found out that there's this other provision that strikes current policy and says you don't have to do this. And I think it's important that we as a body have said we want the voters to understand in clear, plain language what the bill does, opposed to a bill mandating what the exact language is without any review and without any requirement to put in plain, clear language. So I would like to put forth an amendment in committee to do that.
Okay. Okay, Senator Carosa?
And I can submit that right now.
So going back to the amendment, the notwithstanding language amendment, I'm trying to understand the process as far as, my understanding is by that amendment, you bypass the normal process. And what I'd like to better understand is if you could enumerate the process that is waived by using the notwithstanding amendment.
It is the process set forth in the election law article for how questions appear on the ballot. So I believe that's Title VII of the election law article.
I'm asking you to walk through that.
All right, well, let me pull up the thing here.
Okay, well, I do feel, okay, why don't you do that, and I do have just a general thought on all this. Okay, here's what I'm going to say. Okay, it's a legitimate issue, but this is one where conceptual, so I hear the concept, but not having a written amendment, I think is going to be highly problematic. So I'm going to suggest that you get an actual floor amendment drafted up for the floor, because this isn't something we can wing it. And this is, obviously constitutional. We do have, to your point, and so I'm just going to make that, I don't think this is one where we can do conceptual, non-written amendments. So I think that without that, I don't think it's properly in front of the committee without a written amendment. And the floor is obviously an option here for sure. Okay? I mean, that's really how I see it.
Can I respond?
Sure.
So I was never suggesting we should do a wing it verbal amendment. I was talking about a legitimate amendment. We've been rushing this legislation for a very important issue. We've been down here since we got this amendment 24 hours. We have the time to draft amendment in committee. And as you well know, in committee, you have a much better chance of getting an amendment on than in the floor. That's just a practical knowledge in the Senate. So I would suggest I'm drafting the amendment. We take a brief pause so we can have that amendment to put in here, unless, I'm not sure what the speed of rushing this through is.
Well, I don't know. I mean, also, I guess process-wise, it's a House bill. So this bill can also be amended on third reader, in the
No, I
House.
understand we can do it
on
on
the
the
floor.
floor.
I don't know how long and what kind of research is involved and, trying to make sure that this is exactly done properly and doesn't cause all kinds of other issues, which I can't, this is a little bit not something that we contemplated. But okay, I hear your point. Senator Washington, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, just procedurally, was there a second to the amendment?
Yeah.
No. So I'm just trying to be clear about what's currently being discussed. We're discussing the bill, right? And so there's that. And so now there's another amendment offered by you to this bill?
No, I didn't offer amendment. We were
Oh.
asking clarification
Okay.
of the
Just wanna be clear.
procedure moving through the committee,
Right.
since we've only seen the amendment for 24 hours. And literally, it was like 3 hours ago that I realized what the extent of that amendment did. And that's because we are rushing this through. We don't have the proper time to review it.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm saying like,
I'm sorry. Okay,
just,
Senator Washington.
it just seems to me that the Senator's asking for a committee amendment. And so for there to be a committee amendment, there would need to be,
Okay, well,
Are you asking for a
I'm
vote?
saying we need a written amendment in order to properly consider, particularly given,
yes.
the magnitude of the issue. Right now, Senator Simoneau is saying we should pause and break to get an amendment drafted up, and I'm suggesting that this may be more appropriate to just take to the floor at this point and have a full-blown discussion with the full chamber. And then there's more time also to get the draft properly put in front of us. I know you all are doing other amendments, so I'm not sure why this needs to be materially different, but, okay, Senator Carrozza, then Senator Gallion, and then the vice chair.
So it's back to the point, which is related to and just so we're all talking, because we're talking the word amendment, so we're referring to when the HB 2100 was originally introduced, it did not include the notwithstanding language, which was offered and included in the reprint of House Bill 2100, which is what the House voted on. So we did not, as a committee, have the opportunity to discuss this amendment. So Senator Simoneau is offering an amendment, a written amendment that would remove that provision. And what I'm still asking, so we know what we're voting on, I still want to understand that when this amendment was added, this notwithstanding any other provision of the law, and it bypasses the normal process, I'm asking that we understand that we enumerate the process that is being waived, like step by step, so we know what is being waived, what we are bypassing with the normal process. So that was still my question for council.
Okay, can I just defer to the, I would note that yesterday, by the time we got to the bill hearing, we did have a reprint that had that language that you're referring to. So when you say committee didn't have time to review, we had 5 hours with this one line stricken out. I mean, obviously I understand the point here, but I don't think it's accurate to say that we were unaware or could not review. We had in front of us a reprint for 5 hours to look at one line, is what we're talking about here. Okay, let's go to the vice chair and then we'll go to Senator Gallion, and then back to Senator Simoneau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first off, there are references to normally this is the way things would be done. This is new practice because we are now required to have plain language, simplified language, no jargon, no passive language, no duplications, nothing that would be legalese or confuse voters. We had, and you guys in committee had heard this multiple years, there were 400,000 Maryland voters who had voted for governor who didn't vote for some of the ballot language because it was confusing. So what we passed and what is now law and what is in effect for the very first time makes two processes. One is there's a county proposal, there's something that's been signature, people got signatures and all this stuff. It was petitioned to the ballot, all that. There's a draft language process that gets posted on the website. That's what I talked about regarding HB 2101. And they post proposed language. There's also some in each of our counties, in many of our counties. And we have the opportunity, or anyone has the opportunity, to weigh in and say, this is too complicated. People aren't going to understand it. The exception that we passed in the new law, in SB 29, which just went into effect, said if there's language from the General Assembly, it doesn't go through that process. If we give language for the ballot, it goes on directly with the language that we enact. And so, Senator Simoneau, that's what this is. This was clarifying because we didn't meet in time to get the language through some other process, which wouldn't have been relevant anyway. This clarifies that the language, if we pass this language, this is what the voters will see on the ballot. I hope that's helpful, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Senator.
And I can read the lines, but it's
Okay,
very simple. It's two lines.
Senator Gallion.
On Senator Simon Ayer's request, we are in kind of a rush process here. This is a big deal. And, I agree not to have just a on-the-fly amendment vote, and I realize this is a special session, but still, this is still our committee, and we normally, it's not an unusual thing, especially from the minority party, to offer some amendments in committee and other ones on the floor. So I think out of fairness, we really should allow this one. I believe that's the only one that we would offer in committee
Okay,
that I know of. So I think that's a pretty fair
I hear you on that.
request.
I'm just suggesting that, as is almost always the normal case, when you offer between yesterday's hearing of 6 hours and today, that we'd have a document in front of her that you would offer. And I think I can't think of a single example where I said no. But this, I'm going to keep calling it conceptual, is, I think, highly problematic. I know you're writing on paper here, and I don't know that that makes the cut to be offered formally. And I'm saying that we can have this amendment offered on the floor. It's not like there's no remedy. There is a remedy on the floor, which is to offer an amendment written, drafted by DLS with full discussion with the full, as opposed to, I don't know what the senator's writing on his reprint there. Probably the reprint that was handed out yesterday before the hearing, where we had 6 hours to review that one line that's apparently, so with all that said, we'll go to you and then back to Senator Carrozza. Did still have some questions, but Senator Simon Ayer?
So I'm not writing an amendment. So I've officially requested it from the amendment office. So these are notes I was taking on what you were saying, is like we had 5 hours and we had the amendment given to us right before committee, but we were concentrating on all the different aspects of the bill to understand what they meant and so forth. And in fact, when I started asking questions about the amendment, both the Speaker and the Senate President seemed surprised about it, and they had to explain to them that an amendment was given, and I believe it was you, Mr. Chair, said we actually have a reprint of the amendment, because the Speaker was saying, well, what are you striking? She didn't really understand what was going on. So the bill presenters didn't even have the knowledge about the amendment for us to ask intelligent questions. So again, 24 hours to review a big bill and impact on Marylanders. I don't think it's unreasonable to say, let us allow us to get an amendment made. And I'll go back to the point, we all know that amendments are much easier to get on a bill in a committee than on the floor. If the chair or whoever says we don't want it on the floor, I would say maybe 2% of those amendments get adopted in my time down here. So strategically, procedurally, I think this is the right approach. But, I know we're trying to get out of town in 2 days, and this probably is an inconvenience, but that would be my request.
Carrozza, do you still want Stacy to respond to, you had raised, we'll leave it there, and then we're going to have to move forward here.
I'll have the amendment by the time we're done our discussion.
Oh, okay, if that happens in the next 1 minute. Okay, Stacy, did you get the full gist of Senator Carrozza's?
Section 7103 of the election article, says on or before it sets forth what each question that appears on the ballot has to contain certain information. And it describes what that information is. And then on or before July 1st, immediately preceding the general election, the Secretary of State is required to prepare and certify to the State Board the information required, as I just described, of this section for all statewide ballot questions and all questions relating to an enactment of the General Assembly, which is petitioned to referendum. So, and then on or before July 1, immediately preceding a general election, the State Board shall prepare and certify to the appropriate local board the information required under Section B, which is the one describing the items that has to appear on the ballot, for all questions that are referred to the voters of one, oh, I'm sorry, that's the next part. So basically, the July 1 deadline is the date by which the Secretary of State is required to prepare and certify the information about the ballot question. And then you move on to Section 7105, let's see here, which says, a local board shall provide notice of each question to be submitted statewide, and each question, that's the other one here. So subsection B, for any question submitted under Article 14 or Article 16 of the Maryland Constitution, which is what this is because it's a constitutional amendment, the section shall contain the information specified in 7103B. That's the information about the name, the description, the information about the question, and a brief statement. No, this is what the, shall.
She said the local board.
Right, and it was another part of another ballot question. I'm looking here. I'm looking quickly, so,
I'm trying to also see if there
Right.
was a date involved.
yes.
Mentioned the July
I'm getting there, hold on. Let's see here. The state board has to adopt regulations regarding the notice of questions to appear on the ballot, including the use and content of specimen ballots and the publication and dissemination of notice of mass communications.
I'm sorry, so when they adopt the regulations.
Local board, do they, they're at that
Oh,
point?
here's the one that this is applicable.
But I heard publication is.
Right,
is
so the
that-
state board is responsible for making sure that everyone is aware of what the questions will be. They have to adopt regulations about how they're going to do that. The state board and each applicable local board shall post in a manner widely accessible to the public at least 90 days before the general election the complete text of, for a question relating to the creation or adoption of a new constitution or the constitutional amendment. Let's see here. Yes. So basically, there's notice requirements 90 days before the general election about posting of what the amendment, the proposed amendment to the Constitution will be.
But was there a public comment period between the time of, with the Secretary of State and then what the state and local board of elections do in adopting regulations? Was there a time frame or public comment period then?
Vice Chair wants to weigh in on this one real quick.
Stacy, if I can weigh in just for a second. Everything Stacy said is absolutely right. The only exception is if the General Assembly acts. So if you're in Senate Bill 29 from this past session on page 7, lines 20 and 21, it's just 2 lines. There's an exception to everything that Stacy just said about public comment and Secretary of State's language and hearings and all of that. It just says, for an enactment of the General Assembly referring a question to the voters, the enactment. So our language goes directly to the ballot and doesn't go through the process that Stacy so thoroughly and accurately represented.
So the law also added a 15-day comment period, but again, that is waived under the language in the bill.
Okay, any,
I appreciate, and we kind of had to work that through, and that, I just think it's important that this committee knows that when this issue did come up in yesterday's hearing, and a question was asked about it, it was kind of almost dismissed as a kind of a technical amendment. But when you look at what that notwithstanding any other provision of the law means, you just walk through a process that we are completely bypassing with this notwithstanding amendment. Is that correct?
It is bypassing those provisions in the election law article, yes.
Okay, thank you.
okay, well, we have a motion favorable on the bill. We don't have a written amendment. And so is there a second on the favorable motion? I think, unless we had a second, okay. Okay, we have a bill favorable. I expect a floor amendment from Senator Simonaire on the floor on the issue that he raises. Before we take a vote, Senator Gallion.
Okay, so trying to mesh the recently passed plain language bill that we're now saying, well, we don't always have to use that. We have this exception that you referenced. The 15-day process, so were you, I'm trying to remember, you have a lot of election bills every year. Were you the main sponsor, right?
I was.
So can you tell us what the importance was of that 15 days in that legislation that we're bypassing now? Why did you have 15 days and not 15 hours or 30 days? Why 15 days?
The concept, Senator, was to give the general public the ability to comment and yet still make sure that our ballots could be printed and distributed to folks who are getting a mail-in ballot, to our troops abroad, and there's a pretty tight timeline. And so we set a structure. July 1st is the day of the fiscal year. It's the day that a lot of legislation goes into effect. So for a lot of reasons, that was the deadline that the bill drafter suggested and we thought made sense and is what got enacted.
Okay, then may I ask another
Go
question
for
of
it.
Vice Chair? So say if we would have had a special session in May
Yes.
and we would have not had to worry about this. How different do you think the plain language, well, this is assuming, say that was an emergency bill and went right into effect, and then the plain language part was actually law. How do you think that would have looked as compared to what this constitutional amendment, as it is coming out, is? In other words, what do you think the
Sure.
actual plain language version of that would be, of what we're going to vote on here in a minute?
So I don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you that my best guess is that when House Bill and Senate Bill 2100 were drafted, that this amendment language that we're talking about would have already been incorporated because they would have known and been cognizant of the fact that there's an exemption for general assembly language that would go directly to the voters and basically bypass the process that others would, that other ballot questions.
What I'm asking, though, if this would have had time to go on through the process.
Right.
Do you think that would have looked exactly the same as what we're getting ready to vote? So, in other words, we had the truncated, they had to speed things up, and this is what came out, and I realize now that you're changed around so the General Assembly can overrule that. How close do you think it would be, what we're getting ready to vote out of here, compared to what it would have been
Sure.
if your bill would have had full effect and been able to write that paragraph?
Sure. So first off, the bill went into effect June 1, which is the earliest date legislation can go into effect. So we wanted to make sure that ballot measures were covered by this for the November election. So all the ballot measures that were submitted did go through this process. The exception is anything that came from the General Assembly. So I would presume that the language that we are facing, that we are debating, would look the same because it's only the process that's a little bit different when the language comes from the General Assembly. But that's it. The language is what the language, whatever we pass.
Okay, guys, so we have a motion, second. We're going to take two more questions. We don't have any written amendments. Senator Carrozza, Senator Simonaire, you'll have the last vote, and then we're going to do a roll call. So Senator Carrozza?
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, you have been very gracious, and I have the utmost respect for your leadership and the utmost respect for every member on this committee, which is why bringing it to committee and having these conversations and having an amendment considered here, I believe is so important. I believe that this is truly a defining moment in Maryland history, and what we're doing is so consequential. And I think that we should just recognize that what was kind of dismissed in yesterday's hearing as a technical amendment, that what that amendment in effect does, it bypasses a normal process that included public comment. And, you know, we now better understanding the impact of that amendment, which we didn't quite understand yesterday, the way it was dismissed, now at least bring forward to this committee to say, you know, we're not offering a slew of amendments. We're just saying that this one, notwithstanding, which has the effect of bypassing the normal process in a public comment period, that this committee should have a say on that and not just accept what the House has presented to us. We've always prided ourselves being independent as senators. So we are limiting, we didn't come in here, Mr. Chair, with 12 amendments and ask for consideration, have them, and drag this out. We focused on this one issue, and that's why I think it's a very reasonable request. And regardless of whether that request is denied or not, I think it's important that every member of this committee understand what they're voting on with the notwithstanding amendment added to HB 2100. So I will be a no.
Okay, Senator Simonero, you've got the last word.
Thank you.
Sure.
And I've enjoyed working with you over all these years, and I consider you a friend. I'm just talking policy now. So historically in the Senate, the committee is where the work is done on a bill. By the time you get it to the floor, you're explaining it to the rest of them. There may be a couple amendments, but the majority of the work is done in committee. We've had maybe a half hour in committee to do the work. So I brought up issues, been rejected as far as letting me put forth an amendment now. But my question is legal counsel. So the vice chair has made a statement about the plain and clear language as far as that. Do you agree with that interpretation?
Of the plain language bill that passed?
Correct.
Yes.
So it does not apply to a constitutional amendment where they put the language in there.
An enactment of the General Assembly, yes.
So I'm looking at the bill, and it basically says on page 7, line 20, that they have to post it, and then they give requirements. And they say they post the complete text of, and they list different things, a petition, all these different things that could create it. And then it says they have to put the complete text for the enactment of a General Assembly referring a question to the voters. The enactment. I don't read that at all as saying if they put the text in the bill, that's the stipulation. What they're saying is you have to post, if the General Assembly takes an action, you have to present that on the website.
Well, it says for each question posted, including item 3, which you're referencing, of this subsection, a link to the General Assembly or county webpage for the applicable legislation, which is linked on the General Assembly website. So an individual looking to find the enactment just has to go to the website and pull up the bill, and that language is there, and that's the opportunity for them to review that language. And then the General Assembly had a hearing in which individuals were allowed to sign up and talk to their members, and that was the comment period that takes over from the only written comment period that would be available under the plain language bill.
So if a bill didn't specify the actual question in the bill, this says that they're enacting a question that has to go to the voters. So whoever puts it in there, that has to be posted on the webpage, the actual question, whether it's done in a bill or whether it's done by the Secretary of State or so forth. They're saying it has to be posted. And above that, the requirements don't say these requirements only apply. There's a general provision in this bill in 6103, the state board shall, and it goes through there and says, here's what you do. There's no exception in there. It says, if they put the language in there, you don't have to review it or anything else. So I'm really confused how we're interpreting that. If the language is in the bill, they don't have to go through this process.
Right, because the General Assembly has decided to override that additional requirement by saying, this assembly wants this language on the ballot. We do not wish the Secretary of State to make a determination. In this case, because the language was very short, it's very clear. So the question would be describing what the effects essentially are of what the constitutional amendment is. the provisions in here are essentially, some things that you refer to the ballot are very long. The entire legislation might be 10, 12, 13 pages. It might be across sections in there. So it might be, the question is going to be a lot more consequential because you're describing many different things and you have to be a more general summary. In this particular case, you've posted the amendment. It's one page. The question describes the effect of that. The General Assembly thought that would be sufficient. That is the general purpose here in this particular case.
Yeah, I see the requirement that you have to follow. And then later on, it talks about what you have to do when you post it. They don't intermingle and say, you only have to do this if they don't do this. It just says, do this, and it lays out all the things, can easily be understandable and so forth. And then it says, when you post it for a charter amendment, when you post it for a petition, when you post it for a bill enacted through the General Assembly, when you just, that's telling them how to post it. So I think it's very important because I think the language we have today is not very readable and clear. And then not only did they take away the notwithstanding, but in the original bill, didn't they have a provision that said that somebody could review it?
No, it says, at the general election, a question substantially similar to the following,
So if
notwithstanding.
it's substantially similar, wouldn't that mean somebody's reviewing it and they can tweak it?
Well, it would be submitted to the Secretary of State. And then after the bill was drafted, it was determined that there were these statutory deadlines and that the statutory deadlines could not be met in the time frame that the General Assembly decided to meet. In order to align the requirements of the Constitution, which requires that a constitutional amendment passed at the next session be sent at the next general election, you have to make those work together. So this language essentially allows that to work together because you can't waive the constitutional
I'm not
requirement.
talking about the timing, because when I asked.
You have to
the-
talk about the time because that's the only reason that they would have that in there for.
When I asked in the hearing yesterday, the DLS presenter, he said that language is standard language, so it would allow review through DLS and so forth, so they could tweak the language if needed to make it similar. This amendment is striking that, correct, as well?
Correct.
So nobody gets to review. Nobody gets to have the clear language applied to it. It's just the legislature says, this is the language we want to put out there, which many think is misleading at best to the voters. And so I think we should have a check and balance to this. So I get where we are. We're not going to let me do that. So I will ask another question.
Okay.
I have a question.
Well, okay.
This is a real question to understand. If I may, to your.
Okay.
What about?
How many
A real
more?
question.
No, not in contrast to your, no, this is.
Okay,
legitimate,
here,
trying to
Senator,
understand.
how about
I don't
this?
mind deferring to her, as
Okay.
long as I get to talk again.
Yeah.
Okay, because we have a motion, a second on the table. I don't want to jam anybody here, but we got session coming up here. Okay, Senator Washington, and then back to you, Senator Simonaire, and then we're going to have to bring closure. Even if you don't like this language, I mean, there's a disagreement, you vote no on the bill on the floor. I mean, I get all that. Okay, Senator Washington, and then we're going to go back to Senator Simonaire, and then again, we're going to do a roll call.
This is to the intent, so even if we didn't say that except for the, I'm reading the bill or the new law and the stipulations around the comment period and all that. I don't see that it prohibits any vote of the, or that it's guiding the vote of the legislature of how we handle the amendment. So I'm wondering, are these directions to the state board about how to handle? Yeah, so I'm on page 4 of Senate Bill 29, and where the bill's talking about the plain language and it being easily understood. So is this directing the state boards and local boards? Or does it say that the legislature can't take action without these steps. I don't really see this as being a directive to the legislature. It seems to be a directive to the state board.
It's just a generally descriptive,
Yeah,
because subsection B is not to any particular entity. It just requires that each question shall appear on the ballot
Right.
containing the following information. So, for example, when the State Board of Elections is looking at the question, or the state, the Secretary of State is looking at the question, they're looking to make sure all of those components have been met, because the law requires a question to have those components in order to appear on the ballot. So it's not anything specific to one entity, but to any entity that is
so it's
responsible
not
for that.
speaking to the process for ballot language that is drafted by the legislature
Well,
specifically.
no, you're saying that if any question that's going to appear has to have this information. All of this information is in what this bill says here. It says, I mean, to just describe a question or number, a letter determined under, all that here, a brief description of the type or source of the question, a brief title in boldface that describes the topic, goal, or outcome of the ballot question, a condensed statement describing the change in policy to be adopted. That's the language that's in question here. A voter can easily understand, does not explain the legal mechanism providing the policy change. It does not do that, and does not contain legal jargon or use double negatives or the passive voice. The voting choices the voter has, yes or no, and a brief statement explaining what the practical outcome of each voting choice would be. So as long as those components are met, you can go on the ballot.
So, Mr. Chair, I was just clarifying that so that perhaps the members are comfortable with us moving forward, because these, I don't think they necessarily apply to language that is drafted by the legislature. So that's, I want a clarification on that.
Okay. Senator Simoneau, how about one question? We're trying to locate one of our members.
Okay, I still don't know what the burning rush is here to understand the bill.
What's your question? You got the floor.
Thank you. So in the hearing yesterday, it's the legal counsel, we were going back and forth as far as what the bill actually did. So can you walk me through the Shalaga versus Lamone? If this bill is approved, how would that process change if this was approved? So before, they took it to circuit court, it was, they rejected the maps, and I know how that went. After this bill passes, what would be the process for the exact same case?
The process does not change. I mean, you have either.
They can take it to circuit court?
Yes.
Okay.
You can state a state claim, or you can state a federal claim, and you can combine the two. You can go to state court with a mix, or you can go to federal court with your federal claims. That, none of that is changed.
Okay. Would there be any challengeable boundary criteria now after this is approved? So in other words, they basically said the map was extreme gerrymandered and they threw it out.
That was their theory, yes.
Yes. That was their ruling, or whatever the term is. Now, if this bill is approved, I believe it's removing all those boundary criteria as it relates to the Maryland Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Would they be able to have that same challenge and the judge be able to rule that, yes, it is gerrymandered or it is not?
I think that's kind of a loaded question for me, only because there's
I'm just
two
saying
sides.
based-
I'm
based
saying there's
on
two
the-
sides. The side that you are proffering is saying that that decision set up boundary criteria or standards. The sponsors of this bill said no, that in fact the legal interpretations had always shown this to only apply to state legislative districts, not congressional districts. So it is clarifying that the longstanding legal principle was that Article 4 and the sections it relates to or Article 3, and those sections that it relates to only apply to state redistricting, and that this was an erroneous interpretation. So I don't want to take a side in that because.
Sure, no, I understand. And
That is
I'll
the
wrap
question
it
that
up
the
here.
amendment you were debating.
So I know there was opinions on both sides. But going forward, with this being approved, the judge would not have the ability to rule in favor that it is a partisan gerrymandered map because they're removing the boundaries. Is that a correct statement?
What boundaries? The congressional boundaries?
Congressional boundaries based on the state constitution and the Bill of Rights.
This bill changes the language to state that these standards in the state constitution specifically only apply to legislative districts in the state. That's what it does. It provides language around the word legislative district to state that it specifically applies to the Senate and the House of Delegates.
And that's why I love the Vice Chair's bill, because it says a brief statement explaining the practical outcome. So I'm asking, if that same bill was taken to court, would the judge, after this was approved, have the ability to rule against a partisan gerrymandered map based on the boundary criteria in the state constitution or
Could you
Bill of
still
Rights?
state a claim in court about whether a map is partisan gerrymandered? In state court, yes.
No, not, I'm asking about the judge's ability. So I can always take a case to court and throw it out. But if I take and you're the judge, because I think it's important to understand what the implications are. I say this map they just put forward was extremely partisan gerrymandered. Under the Constitution and Bill of Rights, as we amend this bill, could that judge then have the grounds to say, this is a gerrymandered map, I reject it?
I think that's an interpretation question, and
Yeah, I think, that's going to be for some subsequent court, potentially,
I just don't
to
think
weigh
we're
in on
answering
it.
the question.
Okay, guys, I think we've got to the end here. We have a motion. We have a second. Lemoria, do the roll call.
Vote. It's just disappointing that on something this consequential, that we're not given the courtesy of a few minutes to get one amendment drafted that we could have officially here. I mean, in the past, we've done conceptual multiple times. It just, this is a microcosm of, I think, what this legislation actually does. It's taken away minority party's voice. Well, right in this committee, we saw our voices kind of taken away by that process that we just saw. So, I think we pride ourselves in the Senate of how we work across the aisle and our relationships and stuff. And it's just really, this, quite frankly, is a pretty tough pill to swallow on something this big that it's just so unfortunate to see Annapolis become more like Washington, D.C., when we should want to become less like Washington, D.C. So once again, voting no.
I vote yes, and just quickly to explain my vote. I did want to, kind of do a search, look around, see what other states do this. And there are at least 11 other states with multiple congressional districts that do not impose express state-specific requirements. So in this sense, Maryland is not alone, and I vote yes.
To explain my strong no vote, we are bypassing a process that shuts out the public. So we should be clear on what we're voting for. That is why, the notwithstanding amendment, which was dismissed as technical, to really understand the ramifications. And the reason this is so consequential is because we're eliminating the voices of the minority. And each one of you, my committee colleagues and friends, would fight for your constituents the way we're fighting for ours. And so I just think we should be very clear on what we're voting for here, that we are eliminating the voices of the minority. I vote no.
Senator Washington, yes?
Oh, yes.
Senator Savinier?
Yes, no, to explain my vote. I've come across some recent research where 39 states do have state requirements for constitutional maps. And this bill is aligning with a small minority of partisan states at the expense of the people. So I would rather go with the 39 and not the 11. Thank you.
All right, Senator Feldman?
Okay, the chair votes yes. Bill carries 6-3. See you all on the floor in 5 minutes.